Hello, I'm Elizabeth Busby, the Director of Programs for the Theology of the Body Institute. Today we're going to be answering the question, how to handle conflict in your relationship. This video is inspired by a question I got from one of my podcast listeners. And this Discerning Marriage podcast, huge passion project of mine. If you haven't heard from it, may I humbly recommend it to you. I love it so much. And we're actually in the process of discerning if we should film them with the video and put them on YouTube. So if that's something you're interested in, drop a comment below the like button. And if we get enough comments, maybe the powers that be will let me do it. So here's hoping you love it. I love it. Let's get into my question from my podcast listener. I'm going to go ahead and read the question because, again, I really like the full context when I am the one watching YouTube videos. So hopefully you will also enjoy the full context of what's being discussed here. Hi, Elizabeth. I love your podcast. I have 2 questions until now. You talked about a therapy method in the episode with Christina Jalloway. I think it was called Emdr or something like that. Can you confirm? And my second question is that I heard in another episode something about confronting conflict. I am actually married and I would love some recommendations on this topic. Thanks for all you're doing. It's amazing. Hey, thanks for being married and listening to my Discerning Marriage podcast. It blesses me so much to know that you are also benefiting from this work that I am doing. So I will answer the EMDR question at the end of this session. You're not my counseling client. I'll answer it at the end of this video. And then right now, though, I really want to jump into talking about conflict. The reason I was thinking a little bit in my therapeutic mind is because I am a marriage and family therapist and I do a lot of work with conflict resolution, conflict management in my therapy work. That's probably not a surprise to any of you. If someone's coming to see a marriage counselor, probably they have some stuff that they want to work on. And conflict is one of those really big things. So I am going to briefly talk about this one conflict resolution thing that I think is really helpful and then give a resource at the end, a recommendation. So when I do therapy, I come from the perspective of this researcher named John Gottman. He is a secular researcher. He's actually Jewish. Personally, but the research he's doing is secular. And he does a lot of what we call empirical studies on these different elements of marriage, being married, staying married, being happy when you're married, those sorts of things. So he does a really great job of looking into getting actual data. He's not just saying, oh, this is what I think based on my experience. No, he's actually studying couples. He has all these cool methods for doing it. And he's getting this information that now clients like you, therapists like me, are able to use so that you can improve your life in a way that you know is actually going to make a difference because it's an evidence-based practice. One of the things that John Gottman talks about as being very critical for conflict management is understanding what he calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I love this for multiple reasons. 1, it's actually just a really helpful thing. And 2, it's a very clever name. So the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is a scriptural reference, and it talks about the 4 horsemen who come in the apocalypse, and they bring war, hunger, conquest, and death. And so the idea behind calling these 4 different elements of conflict the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is that they will destroy your marriage if they are left to run around unhindered in your communication and your conflict resolution. I'm going to briefly go into them quickly and then talk about what you can do if you notice or when you notice that they're in your relationship. So the 4 of them are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. You can get a lot of information on this on the Gottman website. There are a lot of people out there who talk about it, but I'm going to briefly go over it like I said. So criticism, contempt, criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and then stonewalling. Criticism is basically when you are criticizing someone. That's the sort of thing that you probably know the definition of, right? You're just tearing them down. You're using kind of generalizations. So you're always late. You're never on time. It's basically saying the same thing. But you're always, you're never, you're using these broad generalizations. You're basically just criticizing the person and focusing on the negative and focusing on the faults. You can appreciate why that's not helpful in conflict. The next one is contempt, and contempt is just plain meanness, right? If you're just being mean to someone because you're really hurt, you're living out of your brokenness, you're not actually doing the work that's required to know why what they said hurt you, why you're feeling uncomfortable right now, why you're frustrated, whatever, and you just respond with meanness. And it can be verbal meanness, like using cuss words at the person or saying things about them that aren't kind. It can be like body language meanness, like, ugh, scoffing, rolling your eyes, whatever, that sort of thing. But it's basically just meanness to be mean. And again, you can appreciate why that would not set a couple up for success. So when those two kind of offensive horsemen, contempt and criticism, are running around, then there are two kind of defensive ones. One of them is actually defensiveness, and then one of them is stonewalling. So defensiveness is what you're basically assuming it means, which is being defensive. You can't use the definition in the word to define it. Okay, what does defensiveness mean? Defensiveness basically means that you have built this wall to protect yourself, and you are speaking to your partner from behind this wall. So if the person comes at you and is like, you're always late, if you reply, yeah, well, it's because I was working so hard for this family, and how dare you get upset with me for being at my job so that we can pay our bills and eat. Don't you want to eat? Aren't you hungry? Like, okay, that kind of a thing. That's defensive, all right? But it can also come in the form of like a cross-complaining. So you're always late. Yeah, well, you never pick up your socks off the floor. I'm walking around like your mother trying to pick up all of your dirty clothes. Like, okay, so do you see how that person was given a defensive, or actually was given a criticism because it was always, right? It was generalized, but they responded with another criticism, and we call that cross-complaining. That's another form of defensiveness. You ain't getting anywhere in a conversation where someone is being defensive. There's just no way to actually have a healthy communication interaction. And the last one is stonewalling. And stonewalling basically means that you have those walls that you put around your heart when you were defensive. They are now like total barriers. You've locked yourself in a tower and you're just not going to respond to anything that they say. This can come in the form of, you're talking to each other and you're just not thinking about it. You're thinking about something else. You're not engaging in the conversation. It can come from like blank stare. Yeah. Okay. Or it can come from like being on your phone all the time, like going to dinner and being on your phone. Your spouse is talking to you or your partner is talking to you. You're on your phone, whatever. There are lots of different ways that stonewalling can manifest, but it basically means not engaging in the conversation and not dialoguing with the person. As you can appreciate, all of these seem so obvious. That's a mark of some good psychology when you're like, oh yeah, I totally knew that. I just didn't have the word for it. You can see why all four of those things, criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, would not serve a relationship very well. So I have all sorts of tips for kind of combating those. I include them in my Next Step program, which will be launching soon, hopefully. Very excited about that. But there's also, you can find some also on the internet. It's outside the scope of this video to kind of deep dive into it, what to do. But the first thing that you can do that's really helpful, and what I want to point out in this video, is just identify which ones of those kind of run amok in your relationship, and I notice them and then work to not do them. That's a great first step. Notice when you're doing them, have the humility to recognize, oh my gosh, I am being so defensive right now. I just need to not be defensive and try to engage in this conversation. Whatever flavor your four horsemen take on for you, identifying them and working to not do them is a great first step. So because this person specifically asked for recommendations, I must recommend the Gottman book, 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. I want to do a little bit of a caveat because the Gottmans do lots of very secular research. And so some of the research they put out, some of the things that they say and stand for are not in keeping with our Catholic faith. But I do think it's really important to be able to use what I call your Catholic colander. Dump the entire pot of noodles and water in your colander, shake it all around, and keep the noodles because there's some rich, nourishing things that the world has to offer, and the Gottmans are one of them. So if you can use your Catholic colander, please read the Gottmans book, 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. And they go into not only the 4 horsemen, but a lot of really awesome communication, conflict resolution, just general good relationship, research-based advice. Highly recommend. The last few minutes I'm going to use to talk about EMDR. Some of you are like, what is that? So EMDR is a trauma-based intervention. It's meant to help people work through different kinds of trauma. It stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. It's very clinical terms for basically the body has a natural way that it integrates and processes things that happen, and it occurs during REM sleep. So when your eyes are rapid eye movement, right? When your eyes are moving back and forth when you're sleeping, part of what's happening is your brain is processing all of the things that have happened in your day, all of the things you've experienced, etc. And sometimes when someone has a trauma, that processing gets blocked up. It's kind of like a hose or a big knot in a muscle. There's just this area in the person's brain that isn't able to process what's happened effectively. What EMDR does, this eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, what it does is it simulates the REM cycle sleep when your eyes are moving back and forth through what we call bilateral stimulation, meaning you're trying to stimulate both sides of the brain. So whether you're looking with your eyes back and forth, whether you are, there's like clickers you can put in each hand that basically stimulate this bilateral stimulation, both sides of the brain. And it allows you to process the things that you can't process on your own. So just like the body naturally heals when it gets a cut, but sometimes it's really deep and you need stitches, but the stitches work with the body's natural wound healing. So EMDR works with the body's natural processing and trauma healing and just has a little bit of intervention that helps the body on its way. Highly recommend, as a therapist who is not trained in EMDR, who only is trained in kind of talk therapy, we call narrative-based trauma intervention, I recommend EMDR because it's super helpful. It's very efficient. It's kind of like magic. I love watching EMDR being done or experiencing EMDR as a client is so fabulous. So if you want to look for a good therapist who can practice EMDR, I would recommend looking at catholictherapist.com. That's the database of a lot of awesome therapists who have pledged faithfulness to the magisterium, and you can trust that their Catholic beliefs are going to be something that they hold. They won't necessarily bring it to the therapy room if you don't want them to, but they themselves hold it, which can be really helpful. And you can find EMDR therapists on there. So, anyway, that was great. I hope that answered your question. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this was something that blessed your day. So please leave a comment, please like, please subscribe, all of those awesome things so that not only are you able to receive this great content, but YouTube then allows these videos to be presented to other people who may end up finding something that's helpful and beneficial for them. Until next time, let's pray for each other. I will pray for you. Please pray for me. Bye.